Your position is eliminated. Security will escort you out, my new boss said, unaware I own most of the company. We know you've wasted funds on training. I just smiled, signed the termination papers, and said, do what you must. I look forward to formally introducing myself at Monday's board meeting. Marcus Wright dismissed this as desperate posturing from a disgruntled employee while I gathered my personal belongings, internally knowing the truth he was about to discover. The elevator doors closed behind me as I walked through the lobby of Meridian Dynamics for what everyone believed was my final time. If only they knew the reality. As I stepped into the parking garage, my mind drifted back 18 months to when this whole extraordinary situation began. Thomas Caldwell, the company's beloved founder and CEO, had been fighting stage 4 pancreatic cancer. I'd started at Meridian 8 years earlier as a 24-year-old intern straight out of graduate school, and Thomas took me under his wing immediately. He saw something in me that I hadn't even recognized in myself yet. Over the years, he became more than a mentor. He became the father figure I'd never had growing up in foster care. During his final weeks, Thomas called me to his home office overlooking Lake Michigan. His once robust frame had withered, but his eyes still held that sharp intelligence that built Meridian from a small consulting firm into a Fortune 500 company employing 800 people across 12 states. Etta, he said, his voice weak but determined. I need you to listen carefully to what I'm about to tell you. I've been watching you for 8 years, and I know your character better than you know it yourself. You care about people the way I do. You understand that a company's greatest asset isn't its technology or its market position. It's the human beings who show up every day and pour their hearts into making something meaningful. He handed me a thick manila envelope sealed with red wax. Inside this envelope are legal documents that will change your life forever. I'm transferring my controlling stake in Meridian Dynamics to you, 67% of the company. You're going to own this place, Etta. My hands trembled as I stared at the envelope. Thomas, I can't accept this. Your family, your nephew in California. He shook his head slowly. My nephew cares about golf and trust funds, not about preserving what we've built here. You've earned this through 8 years of dedication, innovation, and genuine care for our people. But here's the crucial part. You cannot reveal your ownership to anyone except my attorney, Patricia Hendricks. Corporate raiders are circling, waiting for news of my death. They want to tear apart everything we've created and sell it for scrap metal. The weight of responsibility felt crushing. Thomas continued, I need you to keep working in your current role as head of learning and development. Watch. Learn. Protect our people from the inside until the time is right to reveal yourself. Patricia will handle all the legal arrangements through a private trust. 3 weeks later, Thomas passed away peacefully in his sleep. I attended his funeral alongside 800 grieving employees, carrying the enormous secret of my new reality. For 18 months, I continued developing training programs, mentoring new hires, and building the employee development initiatives that made Meridian a workplace people genuinely loved. But 6 weeks ago, everything changed when the board announced they'd hired Marcus Wright as the new CEO. Marcus came with impressive credentials from Wall Street consulting firms, promising to modernize operations and eliminate inefficiencies. What I discovered through careful observation was far more sinister. Marcus immediately began targeting departments he labeled as cost centers rather than profit generators. My training division topped his list, despite the fact that our employee satisfaction scores had improved 30% over the past 2 years, and voluntary turnover dropped to industry low levels of 8% annually. The irony wasn't lost on me. Marcus Wright, in his expensive suits and arrogant confidence, had just fired the person who actually owned the company he thought he controlled. He'd accused me of wasting funds on training programs that had transformed Meridian's culture and productivity. The man had no idea he'd just made the biggest mistake of his corporate career. As I drove home that Friday evening, I felt a mixture of sadness and determination. Sadness for what Marcus was about to do to the incredible team Thomas and I had built together. Determination to honor my mentor's trust and protect the legacy he'd worked 40 years to create. The weekend ahead would be crucial. I had legal documents to review, evidence to gather, and a strategy to plan. Patricia Hendricks had warned me this day might come, when I'd need to step out of the shadows and claim my rightful place as owner and leader of Meridian Dynamics. Marcus Wright thought he'd eliminated a problematic employee who questioned his cost-cutting measures. What he'd actually done was awaken a sleeping giant who possessed both the legal authority and moral obligation to stop his destructive agenda. Monday's board meeting was going to be unlike anything Meridian had ever experienced. I smiled as I pulled into my driveway, thinking about Thomas's final words to me. When the time comes to fight for our people, you'll know exactly what to do. Trust yourself, Etta. You're ready for this. Saturday morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching my mood as I settled into my home office with a steaming cup of coffee and my laptop. Something about Marcus's behavior during yesterday's termination felt calculated beyond normal corporate restructuring. His dismissive attitude when I mentioned Monday's board meeting suggested he had bigger plans than simply firing department heads. I spent the morning researching Marcus Wright's background more thoroughly than I'd done when the board first announced his hiring. What I discovered made my stomach turn cold with dread. Marcus's previous 3 positions told a disturbing pattern. At Pinnacle Industries, he'd served as interim CEO for 14 months before the company was sold to a private equity firm for 40% below market value. At Southbridge Manufacturing, his 18-month tenure ended when Blackstone Capital acquired the company and immediately liquidated 60% of the workforce. At Genesis Technologies, he'd restructured operations for 11 months before recommending the sale of the company's most profitable divisions to outside investors. The common thread wasn't coincidence, it was strategy. Marcus Wright wasn't a turnaround expert, he was a corporate dismantler who softened companies for predatory acquisitions. My research led me deeper into SEC filings and corporate news archives. Blackstone Capital appeared in all 3 of his previous companies' acquisition documents. This wasn't random market activity. This was coordinated financial warfare. By noon, I'd uncovered the devastating truth. Blackstone Capital specialized in what industry insiders called asset stripping, buying companies below market value, selling off valuable pieces, and leaving empty shells. They targeted mid-sized firms with strong employee cultures and solid market positions, exactly like Meridian Dynamics. But how was Marcus connected to Blackstone? The answer came through LinkedIn connections and industry conference attendance records. Marcus had worked directly for Blackstone as a strategic consultant before taking his first CEO position at Pinnacle Industries. He wasn't just enabling their acquisition strategy, he was their inside agent, systematically weakening companies from within to facilitate hostile takeovers. The pieces clicked together with terrifying clarity. Marcus's immediate focus on eliminating waste wasn't about improving efficiency, it was about destroying the employee loyalty and operational stability that made Meridian valuable as an independent company. By targeting my training programs first, he was attacking the very foundation of our workplace culture. I picked up my phone and called Patricia Hendricks, Thomas's longtime attorney and the only person who knew about my ownership situation. Etta, Patricia answered on the second ring. I was wondering when you'd call. I heard through the grapevine that Wright terminated your position yesterday. Patricia, we have a serious problem. I think Marcus is working with Blackstone Capital to engineer a hostile takeover. His pattern matches exactly what he's done at 3 previous companies. There was a long pause before Patricia responded. I've been concerned about Wright since the board hired him. His references were impressive, but something felt manufactured about his background. Can you prove the Blackstone connection? I spent the next hour walking Patricia through my research findings. The more we discussed Marcus's history, the clearer his strategy became. Phase 1 involved eliminating key personnel who might resist sudden organizational changes. Phase 2 would involve creating artificial financial crises through strategic budget cuts and operational disruptions. Phase 3 would culminate in Marcus recommending that the board accept a rescue offer from Blackstone to save the company from bankruptcy. The beautiful irony, Patricia noted, is that Marcus has no idea he's trying to manipulate someone who owns 67% of the company he thinks he controls. As majority shareholder, you have absolute authority to terminate his employment and reject any acquisition offers. But there's more, Patricia. I think he's planning something dramatic for Monday. His confidence level yesterday suggested he believes he has complete control of the situation. What if he's already negotiated with Blackstone and plans to present their offer as a fait accompli? Patricia's voice grew serious. If that's true, we need to be prepared for a full corporate governance battle. I'll spend tomorrow reviewing all the legal documentation Thomas prepared. You focus on gathering evidence of Marcus's misconduct and his connection to Blackstone. After ending the call, I returned to my computer with renewed purpose. By late afternoon, I'd discovered something even more alarming. Marcus had scheduled an emergency board meeting for Monday morning to address urgent financial concerns facing the company. The agenda, which I accessed through my still-active corporate email, included presentation of strategic alternatives to ensure company survival. This was it. Marcus was planning to present Blackstone's acquisition offer as the only solution to financial problems he'd artificially created. He'd calculated that firing me on Friday would prevent any opposition from the employee development side, and Monday's meeting would seal the deal before anyone could mount effective resistance. What Marcus didn't understand was that Thomas Caldwell had spent 8 years teaching me to think strategically about corporate governance, employee protection, and long-term value creation. Every training program I developed included elements of critical thinking, ethical decision-making, and collaborative problem-solving. I'd been preparing for this battle without even realizing it. As darkness fell over Chicago, I felt the weight of 800 employees' futures resting on my shoulders. Marcus Wright thought he'd eliminated an obstacle to his corporate theft. Instead, he'd awakened the one person with both the legal authority and moral conviction to stop him completely. Monday's board meeting would determine whether Meridian Dynamics continued Thomas's legacy of employee-centered excellence or became another casualty in Blackstone Capital's predatory expansion. I intended to make sure Thomas's trust in me was justified. Sunday morning brought crisp autumn air and crystalline determination, as I prepared for what might be the most important day in Meridian's corporate history. But before confronting Marcus legally, I needed to understand the full scope of damage he'd already inflicted on our workforce. I started by calling Linda Martinez, our human resources director, and someone I'd worked closely with on employee development initiatives. Linda had been with Meridian for 12 years and possessed an encyclopedic knowledge of every person in the organization. Etta, I'm so sorry about Friday, Linda said when she answered her phone. What Marcus did was completely wrong. Your training programs have been the cornerstone of our employee satisfaction improvements. Linda, I need to ask you something confidential. Have you noticed any unusual personnel changes or policy modifications since Marcus arrived? There was a pause before Linda responded carefully. Can we meet in person? Some things are better discussed face to face. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop in Lincoln Park, far from any Meridian employees who might be enjoying their Sunday morning. When Linda arrived, her usually cheerful demeanor carried an undercurrent of stress I'd never seen before. Etta, I've been documenting everything because I suspected something wasn't right, Linda began, pulling out a thick folder. In the 6 weeks since Marcus became CEO, we've had 17 senior employees submit sudden resignations. These weren't people planning career changes, they were forced out through impossible performance demands and hostile work environments. She opened the folder to reveal detailed notes and printed emails. Look at this pattern. Marcus called in Janet from accounting and told her that her department was overstaffed and underproductive. He gave her 3 weeks to eliminate 2 positions, including her own deputy who'd been here 9 years. When Janet tried to explain that reducing staff would compromise our quarterly reporting accuracy, Marcus accused her of resistance to necessary change. The documentation painted a clear picture of systematic intimidation. Marcus had targeted experienced employees who understood Meridian's operational complexities and could potentially challenge his decisions. By creating hostile work environments for these key personnel, he was eliminating institutional knowledge and replacing loyal employees with temporary contractors who had no investment in the company's long-term success. There's more, Linda continued. Marcus eliminated our employee wellness program, canceled the annual company retreat, and suspended all professional development opportunities except for mandatory compliance training. He claims these are temporary cost-saving measures, but the psychological impact on our people has been devastating. I felt anger building as Linda described how Marcus had systematically attacked every initiative that made Meridian a workplace where people thrived rather than merely survived. The employee wellness program had reduced healthcare costs by 23% over 2 years, while significantly improving job satisfaction. The annual retreat built cross-departmental relationships that enhanced collaboration and innovation. Professional development opportunities kept our talent engaged and reduced expensive external recruiting. Linda, has Marcus given any indication of his long-term plans for the company? She glanced around nervously before answering. Friday afternoon, after your termination, Marcus held a meeting with his inner circle, 3 consultants he brought in from outside. I overheard them discussing Phase 2 implementation and preparing the ground for transition. One of them mentioned that employee resistance would decrease significantly once the ownership structure changes. My heart raced. Marcus was already discussing ownership changes, which meant Blackstone's involvement was further along than I'd suspected. But he'd made one crucial miscalculation. He didn't know that the current ownership structure included a 67% majority shareholder who had both the legal authority and moral determination to protect Meridian's employees. After leaving Linda, I drove to David Chen's house in Naperville. David served as our senior financial analyst and had worked closely with me on budget planning for training initiatives. If Marcus was manipulating financial data to justify his decisions, David would notice the discrepancies. David invited me into his home office, which was meticulously organized with color-coded files and dual computer monitors. His analytical mind was exactly what I needed to understand Marcus's financial maneuvering. Etta, I've been hoping someone would ask me about the budget irregularities, David said immediately. Marcus has been making financial decisions that don't align with our actual performance metrics. He pulled up spreadsheets showing quarterly revenue, expense allocations, and profit margins. Look at this. Marcus claims that training expenditures have increased 40% over the past 2 years, but the actual numbers show only 12% growth, which directly correlates with our workforce expansion. He's inflating the figures to make your programs appear wasteful. David scrolled through additional data. Even more concerning, he's hired 6 external consultants at rates that total more than your entire department's annual budget. These consultants aren't providing specialized expertise. They're performing basic administrative tasks that existing staff could handle easily. The pattern became clearer as David explained Marcus's budget manipulations. Training funds weren't being wasted, they were being redirected to pay inflated consulting contracts for Marcus's associates. The financial crisis he claimed to be addressing didn't exist. He was creating artificial budget pressures to justify dramatic organizational changes. David, do you have access to information about where these consulting fees are being paid? He nodded grimly. That's the most disturbing part. The consulting contracts are structured through a company called Strategic Solutions LLC, which has the same business address as Blackstone Capital. Marcus isn't just manipulating our budget. He's funneling company money to the firm that's planning to acquire us. By Sunday evening, I possessed overwhelming evidence of Marcus's systematic betrayal of Meridian's employees and shareholders. He'd eliminated key personnel, destroyed employee morale, manipulated financial data, and diverted company resources to facilitate a predatory acquisition. Tomorrow's board meeting would determine whether his corporate theft succeeded or whether justice would finally prevail. As I prepared for the confrontation ahead, I thought about Thomas's words during our final conversation. You'll know when the time comes to fight for our people. That time had arrived, and I was ready to honor the trust he'd placed in me. Sunday evening arrived with the weight of destiny pressing against my shoulders. I'd spent the day gathering evidence of Marcus's corporate betrayal, but Patricia Hendricks had requested an emergency meeting to discuss legal strategies for Monday's confrontation. We arranged to meet at her law office downtown, where she'd been reviewing the ownership documents Thomas had prepared 18 months earlier. Patricia's corner office on the 40th floor overlooked the Chicago River, and the city lights reflected off the water like scattered diamonds. She'd been Thomas's legal counsel for 25 years and understood Meridian's corporate structure better than anyone alive. Etta, the documentation you've gathered today strengthens our position significantly, Patricia began, spreading legal folders across her conference table. But I've discovered something even more damaging about Marcus's activities. She opened a folder labeled Forensic Accounting Analysis and revealed financial documents I'd never seen before. I hired a specialist to examine Meridian's recent financial transactions, and we've uncovered evidence of embezzlement. Marcus has been systematically stealing company funds through his consulting contracts. The forensic analysis painted a picture of sophisticated financial theft. Marcus had established Strategic Solutions LLC as a shell company, then used his CEO authority to approve consulting contracts that funneled money directly into accounts he controlled. Over 6 weeks, he diverted over $300,000 from various department budgets, including the training funds he'd accused me of wasting. But here's the most insidious part, Patricia continued. Marcus has been preparing to frame your department for the missing funds. He created false documentation showing training expenditures that never actually occurred, then redirected those payments to his shell company. When the embezzlement was discovered, you would have been the obvious scapegoat. I felt sick realizing how calculated Marcus's plan had been. Firing me on Friday wasn't just about eliminating opposition to his agenda, it was positioning me as the fall guy for his financial crimes. By Monday, he planned to present evidence showing massive fraud in the training department, justifying not only my termination, but potential criminal charges. The beautiful irony, Patricia noted with a slight smile, is that Marcus's entire scheme depends on maintaining his authority as CEO. Once we reveal your majority ownership tomorrow, his corporate authority evaporates instantly. Every decision he's made, every contract he's signed, every dollar he's stolen becomes subject to your oversight as the actual owner of the company. We spent the next 3 hours developing our legal strategy. Patricia explained that as majority shareholder, I possessed absolute authority to terminate Marcus's employment, void his consulting contracts, recover stolen funds, and pursue criminal charges for embezzlement and conspiracy. The board meeting would become a corporate governance exercise where I reclaimed control of the company Thomas had entrusted to me. There's one more element we need to consider, Patricia said as midnight approached. Marcus has scheduled tomorrow's meeting as an emergency session to address urgent financial concerns. My sources indicate he plans to present Blackstone's acquisition offer as the only solution to prevent bankruptcy. We need to be prepared for a full corporate takeover attempt. She handed me a thick manila envelope similar to the one Thomas had given me 18 months earlier. Inside this envelope are all the legal documents necessary to assert your ownership, terminate Marcus's employment, and assume control as CEO. The board will have no choice but to recognize your authority once these documents are presented. As I drove home through empty Chicago streets, I reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought me to this moment. 18 months ago, I was a grieving employee trying to honor my mentor's final wishes. Tomorrow, I would step into the role Thomas had prepared me for, protecting Meridian's employees and preserving the legacy he'd spent 40 years building. The weight of responsibility felt enormous, but so did the sense of purpose. 800 employees depended on Meridian for their livelihoods, their health care, their children's education, and their retirement security. Marcus Wright and Blackstone Capital viewed these people as expendable resources in a financial transaction. I viewed them as the heart and soul of everything Thomas and I had worked to create. Marcus thought he'd eliminated the one person who could challenge his authority. Instead, he'd awakened the one person with both the legal power and moral obligation to stop his corporate theft completely. Tomorrow's board meeting would determine whether predatory capitalism destroyed another great American company or whether employee-centered leadership would triumph over pure greed. I fell asleep that night, thinking about Thomas's final words to me. "When the time comes to fight for our people, you'll know exactly what to do." The time had arrived, and I was ready to make him proud. Monday morning arrived with pristine autumn sunshine that seemed to promise new beginnings. I dressed carefully in my best navy suit, not because I needed to impress anyone, but because I wanted to honor the significance of what was about to unfold. Today, I would step out of the shadows and claim my rightful place as owner and leader of Meridian Dynamics. The corporate headquarters buzzed with nervous energy as I walked through the lobby at 7:30. Employees clustered in small groups, their conversations stopping when they noticed me. Word of Friday's termination had spread throughout the company, and people seemed genuinely confused about why their popular training director had been suddenly eliminated. Sarah from marketing approached me near the elevators. "Etta, I'm so sorry about what happened. None of us understand why Marcus would fire someone who's done so much for employee development here." "Thank you, Sarah. Just remember that sometimes things aren't what they appear to be on the surface," I replied with a reassuring smile. Today might bring some clarity to the situation. The executive conference room on the 22nd floor had been prepared for what Marcus undoubtedly expected to be his moment of triumph. Fresh coffee, pastries, and leather portfolios were arranged around the mahogany table where Meridian's 7 board members would soon decide the company's future. I arrived early and positioned myself in the gallery seating normally reserved for observers. Patricia Hendricks sat beside me with her briefcase containing the legal documents that would change everything. Marcus's assistant had tried to exclude me from the meeting, but Patricia had insisted that terminated employees retained the right to observe board proceedings that might affect their potential legal claims. At 8:55, the board members filed into the conference room. These were accomplished business leaders who'd guided Meridian's growth for years under Thomas's leadership. They included Janet Morrison from Morrison Financial Services, Robert Stevens, who ran a successful manufacturing company, and 5 other executives who understood corporate governance and fiduciary responsibility. Marcus entered at precisely 9 o'clock, accompanied by 3 men in expensive suits whom I recognized from my research as Blackstone Capital representatives. His confidence radiated across the room as he took his position at the head of the table, clearly believing he controlled the morning's agenda completely. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for responding to this emergency meeting," Marcus began in his polished corporate voice. "We face urgent financial challenges that require immediate action to preserve Meridian's future." He activated the conference room's presentation system and displayed a slide titled Critical Financial Analysis. The numbers showed declining profitability, excessive operational costs, and projected bankruptcy within 18 months if dramatic changes weren't implemented immediately. "As you can see," Marcus continued, "our current operational structure is unsustainable. We're spending 40% more on employee programs than industry standards. Our training initiatives generate no measurable return on investment, and our workforce costs significantly exceed competitive benchmarks." Board member Janet Morrison raised her hand. "Marcus, these figures seem inconsistent with the quarterly reports we've been receiving. Our revenue growth has been steady, and employee satisfaction metrics suggest strong operational performance." Marcus's jaw tightened slightly, but he maintained his composed demeanor. "Janet, I appreciate your concern, but these numbers reflect deeper analysis of our true financial position. The previous leadership team may have been overly optimistic in their reporting." I watched the board members' faces as Marcus implicitly criticized Thomas's management without directly attacking his legacy. These people had worked with Thomas for decades and understood his integrity and competence. Marcus's suggestion that financial problems had been hidden didn't align with their experience. "The solution," Marcus continued, clicking to his next slide, "requires immediate and decisive action. I'm recommending that we accept a strategic partnership offer from Blackstone Capital, which will provide the financial resources necessary to restructure our operations and ensure long-term viability." Robert Stevens leaned forward. "Marcus, this is the first we're hearing about any partnership discussions." When did these negotiations begin? And why wasn't the board consulted during the process? Robert, I've been exploring multiple strategic alternatives since joining Meridian. Blackstone Capital emerged as the most viable option for ensuring our survival in an increasingly competitive marketplace. Marcus gestured toward the three Blackstone representatives. I'd like to introduce David Thornton, managing partner at Blackstone Capital, who will present their partnership proposal. Thornton stood and began outlining Blackstone's offer. Immediate cash infusion of $50 million in exchange for controlling interest in Meridian Dynamics. The proposal included operational restructuring that would eliminate redundant departments, reduce workforce by 35%, and focus on core profitable activities. As Thornton spoke, I felt anger building at the clinical language used to describe destroying people's livelihoods. Redundant departments meant eliminating training, wellness, and employee development programs. Operational restructuring meant firing 300 people who devoted their careers to building something meaningful at Meridian. Board member Morrison interrupted Thornton's presentation. Mr. Thornton, your proposal essentially involves acquiring Meridian for significantly below market value while eliminating the human capital that's been our primary competitive advantage. How does this benefit our existing shareholders or employees? Thornton exchanged glances with Marcus before responding. Miss Morrison, sometimes difficult decisions are necessary to preserve what can be saved, rather than losing everything to bankruptcy. But we're not facing bankruptcy, Morrison replied firmly. Our financial position has been stable under the previous management structure. Marcus regained control of the conversation. Janet, I understand your reluctance to accept difficult realities, but the numbers don't lie. Without immediate intervention, Meridian will face insolvency within 18 months. That was the moment Patricia Hendricks stood and cleared her throat. Excuse me, Mr. Wright, but I believe there's been a fundamental misunderstanding about the authority structure in this room. Marcus looked confused. Ma'am, this is a closed board meeting. I'll have to ask you to. Mr. Wright? Patricia interrupted calmly. I'm Patricia Hendricks, legal counsel for Meridian Dynamics majority shareholder. I'm here to present documentation that will clarify the actual ownership structure of this company. The room fell silent as Patricia approached the conference table with her briefcase. Marcus's confident expression shifted to uncertainty as he realized something was happening outside his control. Ladies and gentlemen, Patricia announced, I'm pleased to introduce Etta Caldwell, who owns 67% of Meridian Dynamics and therefore possesses controlling authority over all corporate decisions. The board members turned to stare at me as I stood and walked toward the conference table. Marcus's face drained of color as the implications of Patricia's announcement began registering in his mind. The most important moment in Meridian's corporate history had finally arrived. The silence in the conference room stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Board members stared at me with expressions ranging from confusion to amazement, while Marcus Wright's face transformed from confident authority to dawning horror. The three Blackstone representatives looked like they'd been struck by lightning. This is ridiculous, Marcus finally sputtered. Security, please escort these people out immediately. They're disrupting an official board meeting with some kind of elaborate fraud. Patricia Hendricks calmly opened her briefcase and withdrew a thick folder of legal documents. Mr. Wright, I suggest you examine these ownership certificates, trust documentation, and transfer papers before making accusations of fraud. Everything has been properly notarized, filed with appropriate state agencies, and audited by independent legal counsel. Board Chairman Robert Stevens took the documents and began reading carefully. His expression shifted from skepticism to astonishment as he reviewed the legal paperwork establishing my majority ownership of Meridian Dynamics. Marcus, Stevens said slowly, these documents appear to be authentic legal instruments transferring Thomas Caldwell's controlling stake to Etta Caldwell 18 months ago. If this is legitimate, then she possesses absolute authority over corporate decisions, including your employment status. That's impossible, Marcus protested, sweat beginning to form on his forehead. Thomas Caldwell's estate was settled through probate. His shares were distributed according to his will. Patricia smiled coolly. Actually, Mr. Wright, Thomas Caldwell transferred his shares to Etta through a private trust agreement before his death, specifically to prevent exactly the kind of predatory acquisition you're attempting to facilitate. I stepped forward, feeling the weight of 18 months of preparation and 8 years of loyalty to Thomas's vision. Marcus, for the past 6 weeks I've watched you systematically destroy everything Thomas Caldwell spent 40 years building. You've eliminated dedicated employees, manipulated financial data, and betrayed the trust of 800 people who depend on this company for their livelihoods. Marcus's composure cracked completely. This is some kind of setup. You can't possibly own controlling interest in a Fortune 500 company. You're just a training director who got fired for incompetence. Actually, I replied calmly, I'm the majority shareholder who just discovered that her CEO has been embezzling company funds through fraudulent consulting contracts. I nodded to Patricia, who produced the forensic accounting analysis we'd prepared over the weekend. Ladies and gentlemen, our investigation has uncovered evidence that Marcus Wright established a shell company called Strategic Solutions LLC and used his CEO authority to funnel over $300,000 in company funds to accounts he controls. The board members passed the financial documentation around the table, their expressions growing increasingly grim as they reviewed the evidence of Marcus's theft. David Thornton from Blackstone Capital whispered urgently to his colleagues, clearly realizing their acquisition strategy had been compromised. Furthermore, I continued, Marcus planned to frame my training department for this embezzlement by creating false expense reports showing fraudulent training expenditures. His Friday termination wasn't about eliminating waste, it was about positioning me as the scapegoat for his financial crimes. Marcus stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. This is character assassination. I came here to save this company from bankruptcy, and I'm being attacked with manufactured evidence and forged documents. Mr. Wright. Board member Morrison interjected. The financial irregularities Etta described are easily verifiable through our accounting records. If these allegations are accurate, you've committed serious crimes against this company and its shareholders. I felt 8 years of mentorship under Thomas's guidance flowing through me as I addressed the room with newfound authority. Marcus, you made one fundamental miscalculation. You assumed you could manipulate Meridian the same way you manipulated Pinnacle Industries, Southbridge Manufacturing, and Genesis Technologies. But this company has something your previous victims didn't. An owner who understands that true value comes from protecting people, not exploiting them. The Blackstone representatives began gathering their materials, clearly recognizing that their acquisition strategy had collapsed. David Thornton attempted to salvage the situation. Miss Caldwell, perhaps we could discuss modified partnership terms that would be mutually beneficial. Mr. Thornton, I interrupted. Your company specializes in asset stripping and workforce elimination. Meridian Dynamics will never be for sale to predatory investors who view human beings as expendable resources. Marcus made one final desperate attempt to regain control. Even if these documents are legitimate, I have a binding CEO contract with this company. You can't simply terminate my employment without cause. Patricia smiled and produced another set of documents. Actually, Mr. Wright, embezzlement and conspiracy to defraud constitute more than sufficient cause for immediate termination. Additionally, as majority shareholder, Etta has absolute authority to restructure executive positions as she sees fit. I looked directly at Marcus, feeling the culmination of 18 months of preparation and a lifetime of learning about leadership from Thomas Caldwell. Marcus Wright, I hereby terminate your employment with Meridian Dynamics, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building, and all of your corporate access privileges are revoked. The conference room erupted as Marcus began shouting about lawsuits and wrongful termination while the Blackstone representatives frantically packed their briefcases. Patricia had already called building security, who arrived within minutes to escort Marcus and his co-conspirators from the premises. As the chaos subsided, I turned to address the 7 board members who would help me guide Meridian's future. Ladies and gentlemen, I know this morning has been extraordinary, but I want to assure you that Meridian Dynamics will continue operating according to the principles Thomas Caldwell established. Our employees are our greatest asset, and our success will always be measured by how well we take care of the people who trust us with their careers. Robert Stevens stood and extended his hand. Etta, if you'll accept the position, I'd like to nominate you as Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Meridian Dynamics. The board vote was unanimous. 18 months after Thomas entrusted me with protecting his legacy, I'd finally stepped into the role he'd prepared me to fill. The real work of leadership was just beginning, but Marcus Wright's predatory agenda had been stopped completely. Justice had been served, and Meridian's future was secure. 6 months later, I stood in Thomas Caldwell's former office, now my office, watching the sunrise paint Chicago's skyline in brilliant shades of gold and amber. The mahogany desk where Thomas had signed his final documents now held reports showing Meridian's remarkable transformation since that unforgettable board meeting in October. The numbers told an extraordinary story of organizational healing and growth. Employee satisfaction scores had reached all-time highs of 94%, voluntary turnover dropped to just 4% annually, and productivity increased 28% as our people rediscovered their passion for meaningful work. The training programs Marcus had labeled as wasteful were now being studied by business schools as examples of effective employee development strategies. Marcus Wright was facing federal charges for embezzlement, conspiracy to commit fraud, and securities violations. The FBI investigation had uncovered his involvement in similar schemes at his 3 previous companies, leading to additional charges that would likely result in 15 years in federal prison. Blackstone Capital's reputation had been severely damaged by the scandal, causing them to lose several other potential acquisitions and face increased regulatory scrutiny. The 17 senior employees who'd been forced to resign under Marcus's intimidation campaign had all returned to Meridian with promotion opportunities and enhanced responsibilities. Linda Martinez now served as Vice President of Human Resources, and David Chen had been promoted to Chief Financial Officer. Both understood that their loyalty during the dark weeks had been instrumental in preserving the company's integrity. I'd restored all the employee programs Marcus had eliminated, expanded professional development opportunities, and established an innovation fund that encouraged creative thinking throughout the organization. The annual company retreat had become a 3-day celebration of collaborative achievement that strengthened relationships across all departments. But the most meaningful change was less measurable and more profound. Walking through Meridian's halls, I could see the difference in people's expressions, hear it in their conversations, and feel it in the energy that permeated every interaction. Fear had been replaced by confidence, suspicion by trust, and resignation by genuine enthusiasm for coming to work each day. The knock on my office door interrupted my morning reflection. Sarah from marketing entered with a warm smile, carrying a folder of campaign materials for our latest employee recognition program. "Good morning, Etta. I wanted to thank you again for everything you've done to restore our company culture. My team feels more motivated and creative than they have in years." "Thank you, Sarah. But remember that the real credit belongs to everyone who stayed loyal to our values during those difficult weeks. You all proved that Meridian's strength comes from its people, not from any single leader." After Sarah left, I opened the bottom drawer of Thomas's desk and pulled out the original manila envelope he'd given me 18 months earlier. Inside, beneath the legal documents that changed my life forever, I found a handwritten letter I'd never noticed before. "Dear Etta, if you're reading this letter, then the crisis I anticipated has passed, and you've successfully protected our people. I knew you possessed the courage and wisdom necessary for this responsibility, even when you doubted yourself. The company belongs to you now, but more importantly, you belong to the legacy we've built together. Continue growing, continue caring, and continue proving that business success and human dignity are not mutually exclusive. I'm proud of the leader you've become. Love, Thomas." Tears blurred my vision as I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. Thomas's faith in me had been justified, but the real victory belonged to every employee who'd refused to abandon their commitment to excellence, despite Marcus's attempts to destroy morale and loyalty. The intercom buzzed with a call from Patricia Hendricks. Etta, I have wonderful news. The SEC investigation has concluded that Meridian's financial practices are exemplary, and they're recommending our employee development model as a case study for other corporations. That's fantastic, Patricia. Thomas would be thrilled to know that his vision is influencing business practices beyond Meridian. There's something else, Patricia continued. Harvard Business School has requested an interview about your leadership transition. They want to document how employee-centered management can create sustainable competitive advantages. As I ended the call, I realized that Thomas's legacy was expanding far beyond the company he'd founded. The principles he'd taught me about putting people first were resonating throughout the business community, proving that compassion and profitability could coexist beautifully. The afternoon brought visits from department heads reporting on their team's achievements. Engineering had developed 3 innovative solutions that improved client satisfaction while reducing costs. Sales had exceeded quarterly targets by 18% through collaborative strategies rather than aggressive competition. Customer service had received industry recognition for excellence in client relations. Every success story reinforced the fundamental truth Thomas had taught me. When people feel valued, supported, and empowered, they accomplish extraordinary things. Marcus's approach of intimidation and exploitation might generate short-term profits, but sustainable success required investing in human potential and trusting people to exceed expectations. As evening approached, I walked through the office floors one final time, observing the genuine camaraderie between colleagues who'd weathered a serious crisis together. In the training department I'd once led, new facilitators were preparing programs for next week's leadership development workshops. The Employee Wellness Center buzzed with people enjoying fitness classes and stress management seminars. The Innovation Lab showcased projects that would strengthen Meridian's market position while improving workplace satisfaction. 6 months ago, I'd been a terminated employee carrying a secret that could save the company. Today, I was the CEO of an organization that proved every day that treating people with dignity and respect creates value that no predatory acquisition could ever capture or destroy. The greatest lesson from this experience wasn't about corporate governance or financial management. It was about the courage required to fight for what matters most. When faced with systematic injustice and betrayal, I could have remained silent, accepted Marcus's narrative, and allowed 800 people to become casualties of corporate greed. Instead, I chose to honor Thomas's trust and protect the legacy he'd spent 4 decades building. That choice transformed not only Meridian dynamics, but also my understanding of leadership itself. True authority comes not from titles or ownership percentages, but from the willingness to stand up for principles, even when the personal cost might be enormous. Every employee who'd witnessed our confrontation with Marcus learned that integrity ultimately triumphs over manipulation, that loyalty is rewarded rather than exploited, and that ordinary people can accomplish extraordinary things when they work together towards shared values. As I turned off the lights in Thomas's office, I whispered a quiet promise to his memory. We'll keep growing, keep caring, and keep proving that your vision was right all along. The future stretched ahead, filled with infinite possibilities for the 800 people who trusted Meridian with their careers, and the thousands of clients who depended on our commitment to excellence. Marcus Wright had tried to reduce our company to a commodity that could be bought, sold, and discarded for profit. Instead, he'd awakened a community that understood its true strength lay in the relationships, values, and shared purpose that no amount of money could ever purchase. Have you ever been in a situation where someone underestimated your true power or authority? I'd love to hear about times when you had to stand up for what was right, even when it seemed impossible. Please share your stories in the comments below. Your experiences might inspire others who are facing their own moments of truth. If this story resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe to our channel for more inspiring tales of justice and transformation, and share it with someone who needs to remember that courage and integrity always win in the end. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and remember that sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one nobody expects to have any power at all.